All right. If you think about child abuse in general, right? And you may have a father who gets angry and beats his child. That is a form of child abuse. Well, it gets worse if the father rapes his child. And it gets worse if the abuser enjoys it. And so these sadists, the definition of a sadist is somebody who enjoys inflicting pain on another. And these sadists are the ultimate cowards because they enjoy inflicting pain on little children who can't fight back. And these creeps wake up every day thinking and scheming and planning, how can I take, steal, rape, or kill your child? And it sounds maybe sensationalistic, but it is true. And it's happening in neighborhoods. But there's a good side. If you went through this or any other, let's say, level of trauma, there is a way to heal. And it's magical and it's absolutely wonderful.
Welcome to Linda's Corner. My name is Linda Bjork, and today we're going to be talking about healing from trauma. I'm honored to welcome Jimmi Toro. Jimmi is the founder of the nonprofit Rescue 11, whose mission is to protect children against predators. He is also an artist, author, composer, and music producer. You can learn more about Jimmi and his book at his website, jimmitoro.com, and I'll include a link in the show notes. Welcome, Jimmi. I'm so glad that you could join with me.
Thank you. I really appreciate you giving this this subject a platform.
To me, this means the world.
Yeah.
That people can heal, no matter what they have been through. And you have endured unimaginable abuse. Is it okay if we start with your story, at least a little bit of it, because
Sure.
I know it's awful, so that people can understand from what depths we can emerge and still be okay?
Yeah, you bet. All right. If you think about, let's say, child abuse in general, right? And you may have a father who gets angry and beats his child. That is a form of child abuse. Well, it gets worse if the father rapes his child. And it gets worse if the abuser enjoys it. And so these sadists, the definition of a sadist is somebody who enjoys inflicting pain on another. And these sadists are the ultimate cowards because they enjoy inflicting pain on little children who can't fight back. And there's more of them around in our communities than people realize. And these creeps, they organize. Sometimes they do it alone and this and that, but often they organize. And they often organize into two types of different organizations. One type of organization is similar to like a brothel, where if you're a brothel owner, you have clients, and the clients pay you money so they can go, typically a male can go into a room and have sex with a woman. That's a typical exchange. It's a business. Well, there are such type of brothels that deal with children because there are creeps out there who want to have sex with little kids, these pedophiles, these awful individuals. Well, these types of brothels are more underground and secretive because, well, they don't want to get caught. And it's a business. And to satisfy the business, the owners have to have children. And these creeps are awful. They will order children. They will say, maybe I want a 4-year-old blonde boy with blue eyes. And it's also worse because they get to do whatever creepy thing they want to do with these children. And often they're not satisfied unless there is torture and blood and whatnot. Then you have a different type of organization, which I happened to fall under when I was a little kid, is more of the sexual ritualistic type of torture. And so you have these organizations that get together. One way to maybe understand this is like in Bible history, which most people know in the Old Testament, the Jews had their temple and they had their ordinances and they did their animal sacrifices and they wore their robes and they all these rituals surrounding this worship, if you will. Well, when those people became wicked, let's say, well, they kept similar ordinances, they kept similar robes and traditions, and they kept the similar ritualistic religious aspect of it, except now they're worshiping, something awful. Well, at the center of their sacrifices so often were little children, literally. And it's like, how does it go from this to this? Well, we're not here to talk about that, but it does. And so when I was a little kid, from about age 3 to about age 8, it's not uncommon for boys to age out of that about age 8. My parents, mostly my dad and some other parents in the neighborhood, they got together and they did these types of ritualistic sexual abuse things. And at the center of not all of their things, sometimes they sacrificed adults as well, but usually it was little kids. And they did awful, awful things to little kids. And they're clever. They are literally in your neighborhood and you probably don't know it. If you want to just go look at the registered sexual offenders in your neighborhood, you can find that out. And they're all over. They're in every neighborhood, and they're good at hiding. They're good at not getting caught, and they're good at abusing kids. And sometimes they go too far and they kill kids. And I can get into, if you want, some of the actual tortures they did. You want to go there for a minute?
Yeah, but let's keep it kind of sort of light so we don't trigger everybody. But I know about one when you were 4 and being buried.
Yeah. So they're clever. They really get into what they do, right? And so if you think about history you read a lot about this in medieval times, these torturers and how clever they were in torturing their victims. Well, they were very clever and very imaginative. And these creeps are the same. And so, it's not enough to take a little boy and bury him alive in a coffin and scare the hell out of him and then let him come out. Well, they did that, but they also got bored with that. So they would take a dead human adult body, and it was slit from its throat down, and its insides were taken out, and its ribs were splayed out, if you will. And well, when they stuck that little kid, in this case me and some other little kids, in the coffin while you were stuck inside the cavity of this dead body, right? And which it's just their awful imagination of what they do, because their goal in many of these cases, well, most of these cases, is to get as much horror and screaming and terror out of that little kid as possible. It brings them more joy, let's say. Well, to make it even worse, if you imagine you're in that coffin and you're banging and you're screaming, and for all you know, you're going to die, and the terror level is really high. And well, at some point you exhaust yourself and you kind of admit to the fate that's going to happen to you. And then the lid opens up, and what do you see? You don't just see adults. You see adults laughing at you because they're enjoying this. And that is so psychotically off the charts. I have a hard time calling them humans. And these are the types of creeps and pedophile types and child abusers that are out there. And this happened. These types of awful things happened to me for about 6 years. And they're good. There were like 10 kids in my family. They only picked on me and my sister. And you're like, why? And well, because they're smart. They know that if they just pick on one kid out of a group of siblings and they're maybe found out, or Child Protective Services comes over, or somebody says something, and they ask all the other siblings, well, is this happening to you? And they all say, no, 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 no. Well, then the little kid doesn't get believed. And it's often classic. In another thing to understand is that almost all, I don't know the number, but 95%, some high number of child abuse happens to the child by a person the child knows. This is almost always the case. Well, it's also often the case in families, especially dysfunctional families, that, well, we don't talk about this. A classic case would be a young girl who has a mom and dad, and things are fine, and they get divorced, and mom marries a new guy, and the new guy abuses the young girl, rapes her, et cetera, et cetera. And she says something to mom, and mom doesn't believe her. That happens all the time. So a bit of advice to parents and such is that if you, first of all, keep a good eye out on your kids, because they are targets. They are targets out in public. They're targets online. And these creeps wake up every day thinking and scheming and planning, how can I take, steal, rape, or kill your child? And it sounds maybe sensationalistic, but it is true. And it's happening in neighborhoods. But there's a good side. If you went through this or any other, let's say, level of trauma, there is a way to heal. And it's magical and it's absolutely wonderful. But it's not easy, and it involves a whole lot of pain to get there.
And I appreciate so much that you give that hope, because when we open our eyes and recognize the evil that is in the world and probably in our neighborhoods,
Most likely,
it can be absolutely terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
And so I appreciate that your story includes more than opening our eyes,
Mm-hmm.
but also opening our hearts to the possibility of healing.
Absolutely.
Because that is so important. Can we talk a little bit about repression? Did you remember everything that took place, or was any of it repressed and came out later?
Yeah. So about that. Okay. So let's talk about the situation of child abuse. This could happen as an adult as well. But let's stay with child abuse for a second. If a little child is abused, and right on the heels of that, that child has somebody to go to for safety. That child can literally release that abuse and that trauma out of their system right then and there. But if the abuser is your parent or your caregiver and you have nobody to go to for safety, because the one thing you want by far as a little child when you're abused like that is you want safety. You just do. It doesn't matter. It even doesn't matter who it is. You want some adult to come to you and provide you safety or protection. Well, when you don't get that, you literally bottle and suppress all that up into your system. It literally stores in your body. And in my case, well, that was the case. And so I went through hundreds and hundreds of these awful types of abuse. And then that literally stored in my body till about 15 years ago. And and that's what happens. And, I've not read a scientist who knows exactly why. And there are different reasons. When the memories come back, they can be triggered, or they can just come back. For men in this situation, it's not uncommon for it to come back in your early 50s. You can literally hold on to it that long. For women, you hear more stories of it coming back in their 30s and 40s. I don't know why. That's just the way it is. And so in my case, about 15 years ago, so I'm 60. So when I was 45, the first episode hit me. But it was accompanied by no memory. It was just the physical effects of it, right? And so what happens with trauma is when you are scared to death, the classic flight and panic and fight or flight, panic, freeze, all that, those hormones literally rush through your body because you are scared to death. And that's what your body does, because it allows you to either fight out of a situation or run away from a situation or freeze if you need. And that hormonal rush on your body, like when I had the first episode, I had no idea what was happening to me. 2 a.m, woke up abruptly. My heart was off the charts racing. My whole body was uncontrollably shaking, like a major panic attack. I had no memory of abuse at this time, nothing. And I thought I was having a heart attack or something. I had no idea what it was. And they called the ambulance, rushed to the hospital. They do all the checks. And by the way, you're healthy as can be. You're totally fine. And so for 14 years, I had these attacks, probably 2 or 3 a week, just awful, off the charts attack. And then about a little over a year ago, one day I had another attack and a memory accompanied it. First time the memory came back after 14 years of these. And I had, I thought the attacks were having were bad. When the memories come back, they were way worse because the memories were so off the charts awful. Now, thing to keep in mind about this is when the memories come back, it's not just, hey, I remember being a little kid and this happening to me. You remember the horror, the fear, if you're being suffocated to death, you feel like you're going to die. You remember the sights, the smells, the sounds. You remember all of it. and all of the hormonal rush that happened to you as a little kid when you're scared to death, it repeats itself in your adult body. It all comes back. Now, sometimes the memories can be fragmented, but the emotion is not. And part of the healing process is going back to that moment when that happened to you. And you do want to remember as much detail as you can, but what you're more keyed upon is the emotion of the event. What am I feeling? Am I feeling lost? Am I feeling scared? Am I feeling, am I being raped? Am I feeling that pain? Am I being suffocated to death? You want to identify that feeling when you go back to it. Now, there's a bit of a challenge in all that because a lot of the psychologists and counselors and therapists have different opinions on how you heal, especially from awful trauma. And some say, somatic body work type of stuff is best to do. There's tapping, there's breathing techniques, there's eye movement techniques, etc. Some even advocate forms of like yoga type of body movements. Some even advocate like drama or acting out what happened to you in your past. I'm not a fan of that one. And then there's the classic, talk to a psychologist or somebody who's really trained in this and go back there with somebody, which is the method that worked for me the best. And at some point, if you want to get into more of how that healing process works, I'd be happy to go there.
Thank you. Let's go over a little bit, even some more, what you've talked about, because it is so important to be able to recognize and understand that we can even have trauma in us and not be aware of where it's coming from or why it's there.
Yeah.
And there is an excellent book. It's called The Body Keeps the Score. You're probably familiar with it, by Dr. Bessel.
That's my favorite book of all the books I've read.
And it describes all of the different processes that you mentioned, that people have tried this and had success. People have tried this and had success. People have tried this and had success. And you mentioned, I didn't like this one, but I did like this one. And it's wonderful that we have a choice of tools so that we can choose what feels comfortable and works for our particular situation.
Yeah.
And I also appreciated that you mentioned that with trauma, it is not as if I remembered that it happened. It's not something in the past. It is in the present. It is in the present. And that matters. And that's, again, something that Dr. Van der Kolk mentions in his book. And he explains, because if we are a friend, a companion, a support to someone who has been through trauma, it really helps if we are more aware of what they're going through, so that we don't just, oh, come on, that happened in the past. Oh, don't, just you're making something out of nothing or whatever, to help us to be able to have a more correct response.
Yeah, trauma, keep in mind that the event that happened to you is not the trauma. It's the wound that was created as a result of the event that happened to you. That's the trauma. Trauma actually means wound in Greek. And so that wound is very much alive. And, if you touch an open wound, well, it hurts. And when it's stored in your body, when it comes out, it is definitely an open wound and it hurts. And it's really painful. Another interesting thing is that, there's a classic scenario where, let's say, a little girl might be raped, and then she grows up and she is attracted to and dates men who abuse her. That happens all the time. They because that's familiar territory, as awful as it is. Well, if you have the option to live with your trauma, live with your wound, because it's familiar and you know it, or you have the option to go face it head on and heal from it, which is more painful, most people choose the familiarity option. Unfortunately, many people stay there and they become addicted to alcohol and porn and drugs and whatever as coping mechanisms. Which is awful, because if they want to let's say they turn to alcohol and they become alcoholics. Well, that's awful, because now they have to heal from that on top of tackling their wound, their trauma. Makes it harder. And most people, unfortunately, don't. Many commit suicide. Many are lifelong addicts to something. because facing your trauma head on is so painful. And we as humans, we we seek pleasure and we avoid pain like you wouldn't believe. It's what we do. It's our human nature. And so healing from it, there are spiritual ways of healing. Many people turn to their God or their Christ or whatever. That's great. And then, on the frontier are a lot of healing modalities coming out around, mushrooms or ayahuasca or these types of, approaches, let's say, psychedelics and whatnot. And so, anyways, I am more of a believer that if this is a tough road for you, the answer is to face it head on. Now, it's a more painful approach. It's definitely harder, but if you decide to go down that road, the end of it is magical in its healing. And I've been there and I've done it. I've literally healed hundreds and hundreds of these traumas out of my system. Imagine you're like a bus driver and adult you's on the bus, and behind you, you have a bunch of little you's. And if for instance, you were abused 100 times, you don't know that until you go into them. You may have 100 little you's on your bus that you're driving around with all day. And you have to literally go back to each one and face that horror again, if it was a horror. And you have to help provide safety to that little you right in the moment of when that was happening to you. That's where the magic kicks in. That little you, what does that little you want once again? Wants safety.
Safety.
Absolutely. And in that scenario, I've went back hundreds of these. And I go back as an adult and I find that little kid. And I'm searching for the emotion. Because when that episode hits me, I am feeling exactly what that little guy is feeling. When in the moment when that happened, I'm feeling the exact same thing, the same hormonal dump, the same emotion. So if the emotion is scared off the charts and that's what I'm feeling, or I'm feeling like I'm being killed or going to die, fighting to stay alive, well, that's the emotion. Now I need to go back and find that little kid who's experiencing that same thing. Sometimes I found him fairly quickly, and other times it took days and days. Hard to find. And when I'd find that little boy, I would find him right in the middle of that abuse. And it wasn't my job necessarily to go rescue that kid out of there and bring that kid to safety. It was my job to help the kid find his own safety, to empower the kid so that he could be the one who has the power over the abuse happening to him, right? Because that's what he wanted. And, and so I go back and I help. Like in one case, I have a lot of awful cases, so I'll be careful. Once he was in this room, it's little me, and he was going to be taken into another room where they were torturing kids. And he'd been there before, so he did not want to go there. You could hear the screams. So when I went back there, I heard all that, felt all that again. These adults were coming at him, and this one lady in particular was going to grab him. And she started with a really sweet face, like, "Oh, come on, little Jimmy." And then when I didn't want to come, that sweet face turned into the most awful, evil face like that. And she went out to grab him. And right as she did, I whispered in that little boy's ear, "What do you want to do?" And each time I did that, I had no idea what that little kid was going to. As an adult, I had no idea. And in this particular case, he says, "I want to freeze her." And do it. He did. And she literally froze in like a block of ice. Now it's magical, etc. And that allowed me and that little boy, and he hopped in my arms, scared to death, and I held him tight, and we got out of that room. We just walked and walked and walked and walked until we felt safe. That particular episode of that trauma and that particular event was one little me on my bus. And when that little boy found safety that way, magical as it is, that particular trauma literally released out of my body. It's not there anymore. I can talk about it. The harsh emotions are not there anymore. And I had to do that hundreds of times. And so in my book, I talk about all this that we're talking about so far, the first part of the book. And the second part of the book, I illustrate 22 episodes from some really bloody, awful ones to, not all trauma is blood and torture and pain. Sometimes trauma is being lost. Sometimes trauma is not being heard. you're in a family of 10 kids and all this chaos going around, and you just want to be heard because this awful thing's happening to me. Nobody cares or listens. That's traumatic. Sometimes carrying the weight of witnessing another little child that was a friend of yours die, that's traumatic. You can carry that weight with you your whole life if you don't figure out how to release it. So for about a year of time, after 14 years of these awful episodes, I went through about a year, just under a year, of the memories coming back almost daily. And I had to go back to each one, face it, help this little boy create this magical scenario. And each time that I did it correctly, it literally left my body, all of it, trauma, all of it. It's not in me anymore. Now, I had some beautiful ones. I had some really awful ones, and I'll share a beautiful one. It's once I felt this pain. Another same thing, whole body just shaking off the charts, just feeling awful as can be. And so I went and what is it? What am I feeling? What am I feeling? And you could identify it was an extreme sadness. Now, sadness is an interesting emotion, right? It's awful, but it's not an evil emotion. Good people feel sadness. Good people don't feel revenge and hate, anger. Those are bad emotions we don't want to feel. But sadness, good people feel. I felt off the chart sadness. So I went and I arrived at this scene, like an epic scene out of a movie where the mountains come in the valley, just really beautiful scene. And yet I was feeling this heavy, heavy sadness. And I sat there searching, where can I find this little boy? And I was looking all over. And when I went back to these, I often like floated, like I was just floating, moving where I needed to. I wasn't walking or in a car or anything. And off in the distance, I saw this little figure moving towards me. And I could identify that was little me. He was walking kind of towards me. Then he proceeded to walk by me. He didn't even notice me. and I felt compelled to not go to him. And he walked by me. And as I looked, as he walked beyond me, I could see he was walking towards this female figure who was sitting at the base of the mountain. And she was sitting there, and she was like a mother figure, like a heavenly mother. And he was I could tell, okay, he's walking straight towards her. So I went closer to the scene, and I thought he would walk right up to her and they would have some conversation, and I'd be able to witness the conversation and hear it. But he didn't do that, which really surprised me. As he approached this woman, he walked directly in her arms as she was sitting down, and he curled up in a fetal position, and she held him. That's what he wanted. And that particular trauma of carrying that heavy sadness was instantly released. Magical, beautiful as can be, but a hell of a lot of pain getting there. And so I had some really beautiful episodes, and then I had some really awful, awful episodes of a lot of death and carnage type of stuff. And so I would encourage people who either have some level of trauma or feel they want to heal, and they've been carrying anxiety or depression or something like that their whole life. It's in you. It's all in you. All of the yuckiness is in you. And if you can figure out how to go back and face it head on. I use the kind of analogy in history. There's a classic story that's been told for centuries and millennia, whatever. It's a classic story of a knight who leaves the castle and he has to go rescue the princess who was taken by the dragon, right? That's a classic story. Well, that's informative and interesting because when the knight has to decide to go. And when he steps outside of the castle walls, he's no longer in the safety and the protection of his family, his friends, the army, etc. And it's dangerous outside the castle walls. And he has to go on a journey, and the journey's dangerous and it's fraught with danger. And then if he makes it to the dragon lair or wherever the dragon is, he can't just go steal the princess when the dragon's asleep or something. No, he has to contend with the dragon, and he has to kill the dragon. He has to kill it literally. And well, that's where the most danger is, because maybe many knights before him went to rescue the princess and they didn't make it. If he succeeds in killing the dragon, which is facing his fear head on, and he actually brings the princess back to the castle, well, that person has gone on their heroic journey. And it wouldn't be very heroic if it didn't have all that pain involved. And so I encourage people, if you're dealing with stuff like this, figure out in yourself that, yeah, I want to be a hero. I want to go on my heroic journey, and I want to face my demons and my dragons. And if you do, and you do it right, and you do it, another interesting thing that if you go and face your fears head on, you will be filled with all kinds of good hormones. If you are forced to go do something you don't want to do, kicking and screaming, you're going to be faced with more anxiety, more fear, and more of the awful hormones. But if you can go on your heroic journey properly with the right frame of mind, well, you're a hero, and you can release this stuff. You literally can get it out of your system. It's beautiful.
And that makes all the difference.
It really does.
I really appreciate your analogy of a knight going out to fight the dragon and to rescue the princess. And that is what you have done, is you have been the knight who has gone out and rescued. But in your individual story, rather than just fighting the dragon for, in your case, not a princess, but little me, instead, in essence, you gave the sword to little me.
Yes.
And you can fight this dragon.
Exactly.
A role of being the one person that little me could go to and would safely listen and empower. And you gave some examples that inside of you, you knew the answers. They were in there.
They were.
In one instance, what do you want? What does little me want? And it was to freeze her.
Yeah.
And in another one, it was, what do you want? And you had the patience and the insight to wait and watch. And little me showed you what he wanted, what he needed. And that was to be held and to be loved. And you helped provide that strength and that empowerment for little me. And when little me feels safe, then the adult me can feel safe as well. That is so important.
It is. And it's very magical because you literally go back and rewrite the story. You literally rewrite the narrative. You literally, this may sound off the charts. I don't have a way to prove this, nor do I care. You literally go change the past. And you provide that safety to that little guy. Therefore, your body can now release what you've held on to all these years. It is as literal as anything I know. In fact, the memories I have, these memories I have many of them are more literal and real and full of emotion than a memory of, let's say, the day I was married or the day as a kid I broke my collarbone or something like that. You think back in memories that you've had in your life that, you think, well, what's the emotion around the day you broke your collarbone? Well, it hurt. I had to go to the hospital. I can remember a lot of details about it. And then I had to wear this brace thing for, a bunch of years as a kid. I can remember feeling the crack and the pain of it. I remember all of that. Well, these suppressed memories, I remember them even more vividly. They're real. And going back and healing them is just as real as all that. It works. It absolutely works. And even Dr. Van de Kolk will attest to that. I've read every book and listened to every podcast by every expert on the planet. And he's one of the best.
He is. He's very, very good.
Yeah.
And your memory modification is also absolutely true. And I have also had podcast guests who have talked specifically about that, about going back and rewriting and changing the memories and how it changes everything. And that is, I'm grateful to hear your witness that this works. It works.
Yeah. Now, when you go back there, if you decide to do that, the one thing I would recommend, well, obviously, if you could get a good fortunately, I had a wonderful psychologist who specialized in sexual ritualistic abuse. That helped. But there are many, because my memories came at random. That's one of the awful things of this post-trauma coming back, is that Well, when all the memories started flooding in, I had no idea if I was going to have to deal with 5 of these or hundreds of these, and nor did I have any idea how long it would last. That is not a good thing mentally, because you just don't know how long is the pain going to keep going. You don't know. Well, that's a challenge to deal with. In each one of these that I had to go back to, the one thing that helped more than anything was having somebody there. Sometimes it was just my daughter was home and I could just hold her hand, and just having that, because the process of going back in time that many psychologists use, especially body work and whatnot, is they are trying to keep you grounded in the present as you go back to the awful thing. And knowing that, okay, I'm mentally here with this little kid who's getting the hell beat out of him. But as an adult, I'm sitting on a couch in a safe environment in my living room. Having a hand to hold for anybody like that is so important, because once again, what did that little kid? You're going and reliving that. What did the little kid want? He wanted that hand to hold. And so if you can mimic that, repeat it as an adult while you're going back there, it's the best. I because these happened to me completely at random, many times I did not have an adult. In the middle of a meeting, I had to leave. I had nobody to go to. Well, I had to just suffer through it, and I didn't resolve it. I had to go. It came back again. So yeah, have somebody in your life who loves you and cares about you when you go back on these journeys. It's the best.
That's excellent advice. These specific things. This is how you do it, and this is the support that you need or will be helpful as you go through to keep
the little you wanted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Wow. Jimmy, I am so sorry for what you have gone through. And I am so grateful for the wisdom and the insight that you have gained and the witness that you offer that people can heal.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, you're not the only person who's been through that.
Oh, thousands, tens of hundreds of thousands. We just don't hear about it enough.
No.
Probably
because
millions.
not everyone is as brave as you are to come and talk about it. And so I really appreciate you, because your words can help thousands of people be able to heal from their own traumas.
I hope so. Yeah.
I appreciate you.
Yeah. Another thing to keep in mind real quick, I know don't want to go on too long for your show. If you go through a lot of these, your body will be affected. These hormonal dumps, adrenaline, cortisol, especially if you go like I did day after day after day. At the end of about a year of that, I remember vividly going through my last one. I knew it was my last one. I just intuitively knew, and it was the most awful one off the charts by far. And at the end of all of that year of going through all those and healing from all those, my body was wasted. I literally could hardly walk from one room to the next. Stress really affects your body. I remember a couple of weeks after that, trying to recover. I remember getting down and trying to do a push-up. Before, I could do plenty of push-ups. I could run for miles. I've always been very healthy. I got in a stance and I went down and I collapsed, and I was literally wasted for days. My body was so weak from dealing with all that. So keep that in mind. This has a real effect on you physically. Fortunately, just slowly, after it's been about 6 months since my last episode. I ran a mile for the first time just the other day. So you can recover. Your body is amazing, but know that if you're going through this, that it has a real physical effect on your body, and you have to try to get rest, try to eat right, try to be healthy, try to be as healthy as you can. But purging all these out of my system has been the best thing, because they're gone and I can heal, and now I can go help people.
And I appreciate you mentioning that, because as we talked about before, when you have these things inside of you, they are in there they are trapped in there, and they will stay in there until you acknowledge them and let them go.
Yep.
But because it's scary, many people choose, I'm not going there. I would rather get drunk. I would rather do anything than remember that.
Yeah.
But
because you're not just remembering it, you're reliving it. Yeah.
it's worth it.
Oh yeah. It's quite magical. The healing aspect of all this is so magical. It's so wonderful. It's almost unbelievable. It's almost unbelievable to the point where somebody who's going through something may not believe that magical element really works. It does. I've done hundreds of these. It works. Awful, but it works. The healing is so magical, so wonderful, actually. Yeah.
So the process is awful, but the results are magical and wonderful. And that's the thing, because you have to know that it's worth it. I'm not going to go out and fight a dragon if I think the dragon is going to kill me, if I think it's just not going to work. But if I know that it's going to be better in the end, it helps me have the courage to take the steps that I need to get there.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So, Jimmy, thanks for visiting with me today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for the platform. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing your story. In closing, I'd like to share a quote by Dr. Peter Levine. He said, "Trauma is perhaps the most avoided, ignored, belittled, denied, misunderstood, and untreated cause of human suffering. If you have suffered from trauma, I want you to know that you absolutely can heal." See you next time on Linda's Corner. Thanks for listening. Please share and subscribe to help us reach new listeners. And if you'd like to heal your life from the inside out, there is a free video series at hopeforhealingfoundation.org. Just click on the Free Stuff tab. I also invite you to grab a copy of one of my books, like Crushed, A Journey Through Depression, and You Got This, an action plan to calm fear, anxiety, worry, and stress. See you next time on Linda's Corner.